I'm Davor Džalto. I'm professor here in religion, art, and democracy, an interesting combination. And today I'm going to say a couple of things on the topic of iconoclasm. The reason why I chose this topic has to do with its importance for the whole program that we have here on icons, theology, art and theology, where we look more closely into the issue of images, their significance, their theological meaning, especially in the Orthodox tradition. So iconoclasm is normally understood as either destruction or desecration of images. It literally means breaking images. And this is what we can find in all of the major religious traditions. So the common perception that sometimes you'll find not only in popular culture or in media, but also in scholarship, is that there are certain of these religious traditions that are somehow more anti-image oriented, that affirm iconoclasm by default. And there are other religious traditions that are image affirmative. But in actual reality, the story is much more complex. So both within Judaism and Christianity and Islam and many various Judaisms, Christianities, and Islams, we actually have a variety of positions on images. And we can really talk about basically four major ways in which these different religious traditions and religious people and theologians approach images within each of these major traditions. One is, on the one end, let's say extreme end, is a position, very iconoclastic position, or a position of radical iconoclasm, which says basically no images whatsoever, so that any production of images, any use of images is considered somehow unacceptable, sinful, or whatever else, any other word we might want to use to describe that position. One must say that this position is very rare. So this is a rare position to find in any of these major religious traditions. What is more common on this, let's say, iconoclastic end of the spectrum between radical iconoclasm and radical affirmation of images, is a position which says no religious images, please. So in other words, other types of images, representations can be allowed, but not religious images, or, which is a variation of that, no religious use of images. So that images are allowed, but not religious images, let's say the portrayal of certain religious figures or religious events, or the use of images, whatever they may be, within the religious context or a liturgical context or prayer context, and so on and so forth. It is interesting to point here that the one of the reasons why radical iconoclasm, which completely rejects images, is so rare, is that it is really difficult to avoid images in any of their manifestations, because it is really difficult to think of expelling the entire field of visuality from our ordinary experiences, what we do, and also from a religious context. So even those that sometimes affirm this radical iconoclasm still use certain visual representations that are, let's say, of symbolic kind or more abstract representations where certain visual elements are there to give you an indication of certain abstract concepts, but to completely erase the images or any kind of representation is really difficult to even conceive. Then we have also something that you may call iconoclasm from one perspective, or you can also see it as an image affirmation, and that is the prohibition of the worship of images. So in other words, moving from radical iconoclasm via the iconoclasm, which says no images in a religious context, we can arrive to those positions that say images are fine, not just any kind of images, but also images with religious motifs, as long as you do not relate to them in a way which would indicate worship or adoration of images. And those who advocate for that position would normally use the term idolatry for those who actually, how to put it, affirm images or relate to images in a way which indicates more, let's say, appreciation than a simple visual observation, which takes into account that it is just a 2- or 3-dimensional representation without any other meaning, or especially religious meaning, religious dimension to that. And then, of course, on the other pole, we have positions that so strongly affirm images that we normally call, or people call them, idolaters. Relating to images in a way as if they had some kind of supernatural power, or were an incarnation of gods, let's say, so that in that sense they are understood as idols, or that those who worship those images relate to 2- or 3-dimensional objects as if they were something else, like gods, or somehow a manifestation of a divine presence. Now, it is important here to note that the accusation for idolatry usually comes from those who are from these other camps. In other words, people rarely describe themselves as idol worshippers. Idol is a word that in the meantime, it was of course not in its etymology from the beginning, but in the meantime started to signify those false gods, or false images of false gods. So that is especially in the Christian traditions how Christians started to differentiate their own images that they consider legitimate and pious vis-a-vis polytheistic images that are labeled as idols, either, as I said, because they're images of false gods, or because they are also false images or idols in some way. For the Western tradition, European tradition, let's say, there are two major cases of iconoclasm, and that is the iconoclasm in the Eastern Roman Empire in the 8th and the 9th centuries. This one was a very important event for the whole empire, and it wasn't just about abstract concepts of images and how we use them. It was also a political issue, and the very duration of that conflict tells us about how profoundly that conflict was relevant for virtually all the spheres of society in the Eastern Roman Empire in this period. Of course, the point of this presentation is now not to go into any details of this very complicated affair. The point is to say that out of that conflict, we have, for the first time, very detailed formulation of what icons or images, what they mean in the Eastern Christian tradition, why they're so important, and how they're to be related to from this particular religious perspective. And this is what we ordinarily call theology of icons. Of course, that theology of icons has been upgraded, interpreted, expanded, reflected upon over the past more than a millennium. But in many ways, this theology that came out of this iconoclasm remained somehow formative or canonical for this Eastern Christian tradition. And what is also important to note is that the reaction to this conflict in the Eastern Empire and the formulation of this theology in the West was a different understanding of images. And we can really trace back to this period many of these differences in the understanding of the place and role of images and visuality in general vis-a-vis the liturgical context, and especially in the context of theology. The second iconoclasm that also profoundly shook society at that time was iconoclasm that came with the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, and in many places continued over the 17th century as well. So what we find there is, again, in a Christian context, Western Christian context, a profound conflict between image supporters and image breakers. And here again, it was not just simply between those who loved and supported images in all their aspects and those who wanted to destroy them altogether. It was mostly about what kind of image was allowed or was acceptable, and what was the proper context for that. And from those early Protestant theologians, we see that the majority of them actually was not against images per se, but were against images in the church or liturgical context. And of course, using images in this context, they would label idolatry, primarily because they wanted also to delegitimize the major opponent, which was the Roman Catholic Church. And very often you would find there in their writings things like papal idolatry and things like that. So it was, again, at the same time, a much broader cultural phenomenon, not just something that we can keep within, strictly speaking, religious or ecclesiastical or liturgical context. These two cases actually show that there is something profoundly important about images, and that it is not only important from a theological perspective, there are cultural implications and there are also political implications to images. So one can say, I think, justifiably, that every theology of icons is also political theory of icons. There are always political implications, political issues at stake there, and the way how we relate to images ultimately tells us something how we relate to what we naively call reality. So if you want to learn more about all of these complicated issues and history and genesis of these questions and images and image theories, I would strongly suggest our program, Icons, Art and Theology, or particular courses within this program. Thank you very much.